Right, this will go live really quickly, like that. Hi everyone. Very excited to be joined by Vaseem Khan. Do you want to start us off with an intro to you and your books?
Yeah, absolutely. You're not half as excited as I am to be here, Caroline. We've known each other for a few years, and every time I chat to you, I discover something new about you. And I've just discovered today that your brother played for his local county at schoolboy level, which is more than I can say, which makes me insanely jealous because I'm a very
I mean,
eager.
I may have made that up, by the way. I don't actually remember where he played
So we're
for.
beginning with telling whopping great lies, are we? Okay, great.
No,
Yeah.
no. I mean, he was good at it. He's also 10 years older than me, so I can't remember.
Oh well, in that case, I played for England.
There you go.
We could tell whopping great lies. Okay, so you want an intro to the book. So whoever showed up, I can't tell who's turned up, but if you are here, well, thank you for spending your evening listening to me go on about this book, Quantum of Menace, which is the first in a new series featuring Q from the James Bond franchise. And the first thing to say is that it's not a spy novel. It is Q. It is a traditional mystery. It's a small town mystery, and Q has been booted out of MI6, and he's age 50, so he's neither Desmond Llewellyn nor Ben Whishaw from the films. He's somewhere in between. He's not married. He's got no kids. He's not got many friends, and so he's a little bit at sea. And then what happens is that he receives a cryptic letter from his recently deceased childhood friend, Peter Napier, and that letter draws him back to his hometown, a very small town of a few thousand people, a couple of hours outside of London, called Wixton on Water. And he comes back because he wants to give himself something to do now that he's been kicked out of MI6, but also because he doesn't quite believe the circumstances of Peter's death, and he wants to reinvestigate this case that the police have already put to bed. And so essentially, what we have is Q in this small town, looking at the death of his friend, who's a quantum computer scientist, hence the title Quantum of Menace. And it's also a story about a man who finds himself a little bit at odds with the world after 3 decades of working for MI6, being locked down in his lab. He now finds himself down in returning to his small village where he has left a very messy past behind, which he also has to deal with as he navigates trying to solve this mystery.
Yeah, that was one of the things I was thinking about this morning. Is your books, when I've read them before, are very rooted in a sense of place and people's sort of belonging there. Whereas this one has Q feeling very much like sort of he's not he's kind of disenfranchised from everything, isn't he? He's lost his job. He doesn't really feel at home in his hometown. It's a very different kind of story for you.
Yeah, he's been estranged for 3 decades from his hometown for a reason that we discover in the book. And for those 3 decades, he's worked in this lab, in this secret lab at MI6 for Q Branch. He's the head of Q Branch, which is the part of MI6 that is producing weapons, but also field kit and technologies for the 00 agents, who are the field agents and largely assassins, but also they're carrying out missions around the world in service of MI6's overall mission. And so now to be cut off from all of that, that is one shock that he receives at the beginning of the book. And he's kicked out of MI6 by the new M, who doesn't particularly like him for some things that have happened earlier in an earlier meeting between them. And so she uses her political clout to find an excuse to push him out. And then also, because he's coming back from someone who's had a global view of things, right? Dealing with all of these bad actors, and we recognize them from the James Bond books or the films. And now he's having to come down to this small town and look at the small town local life, which he's not been a part of because he's been living in London for 3 decades, close to his offices at MI6. And now to have to come back and navigate what local communities are dealing with, what they're thinking about, it's a real shock to his system. But I think that's part of the fun of this book, because he's a serious man. He's not a caricature. Sometimes in the films he became a bit of a caricature with just 5 minutes in the lab, everything explodes around him, and he just says, "Pay attention, Bond." There's still a bit of that. So he's got that dry sense of of the world around him, but now he has to bring it into this small town where people are not quite as he remembered, because in his memory it hasn't changed in 3 decades. But of course, we know that small towns like this have changed tremendously, especially over the past decade.
I like that you put a little puzzle in the acknowledgements. So
Yeah.
the bit at the very beginning, I can't solve it because I know so little about James Bond. I have no idea what it's talking about.
Well, dear
But
oh dear,
like,
Caroline, dear oh dear. And you're a teacher, so if you were doing this exam, I would give you a massive, great big fail. Yes, you're right. I like to have a bit of fun, and Q is a cerebral guy. He's an intelligent guy, usually the smartest person in the room. And this book, as I said, is a traditional mystery, so it's about the puzzle. He's not firing rocket launchers from the tops of speeding trains. Um, and so I've put a little riddle at the beginning of the book. If you buy the book, you'll see that riddle, and you can enter a competition to win a Q and Bond goodie bag from my publishers. And it's proving to be quite a popular competition, I have to say. There's already been about 200 entries just in the first couple of days, because the book's widely on sale everywhere, and people are quite liking the look of that riddle. So a lot of people do know the answer. I think, Carolyn, it's just you.
yeah, no, it was just me. I read it to my husband and he told me an answer. So
He's probably got it right because he's a bit of a Bond fan, isn't he?
yeah, I'm gonna guess he's probably got it right. Um, nice little touch as well in the book of adding where you work.
Yes, that's true. And I think that's so. For those who haven't read it yet, um, there's a couple of scenes where Q comes back from his hometown as he pursues this investigation. He comes back to London, and one of those scenes takes him to MI6, um, to Q branch, to meet the new Q, who's his polar opposite. And I had a lot of fun with that character in that scene, because Q, of course, now is persona non grata at MI6. And, he knows he's not supposed to be there, but he needs this man's help. And he resents the fact that he's been pushed out, and he resents the fact that somebody else is now sitting on his chair, this young Turk who he doesn't think is suitable for the position. So we have a lot of fun with that scene. But the other thing he does is he tries to track down a bit more information about quantum computing. And so he ends up at a place that I've worked for 2 decades, which is University College London. Specifically, I'm not an academic. I manage academics and academic centres. And one of the centres I help run is called the Centre for Future Crime. And we have a scene with Q there. And it's largely, it sounds very, very Tom Cruise Minority Report, but really it's a center that's looking at how emerging and new technologies might be used by criminals and bad actors. And, I can scare everybody straight right now by telling them how easy it is to commit these kind of techno crimes these days, because you don't even have to be a really technical person. There's something called crime as a service now, where you can go onto the web or the dark parts of the web, and you can buy ready-made algorithms, that AI algorithms that will help you to commit identity fraud and all sorts of other things. I'm not recommending that you do that, obviously, but it's become so much easier. And a lot of these things are also now orchestrated by organized criminal gangs. And, the idea that the organized criminals are just the thugs going around beating people up is wrong, because what they do is they hire these smart young things who understand cybercrime, and they pay them loads of money to carry out this kind of technologically advanced crime.
The what is it like writing for the Bond estate? Because do they sort of give you some set rules that you have to write by? Can you have like enough license to change things? What?
Yeah, license to thrill, Carolyn. License to thrill. Look, they've been absolutely lovely. They've been reading some of my other books, my Malabar House novels, which are set in 1950s India, and India's first female detective, and working with an English forensic scientist. And they like the sort of dry note of humor that go through these very serious murder mysteries. And so they wanted someone who could create that kind of murder mystery, but at the same time maybe have a dry note, because Q is a very dryly observant person. And they approached me, and I thought they wanted me to audition for James Bond, but sadly that was not the case. They wanted me to write this book series featuring Q, and they were very clear that they didn't want spy novels. They wanted, traditional mysteries. And ever since then, it's been an absolute joy to work with them. You do have to go through an approval process. You have to submit some ideas. So the idea for Quantum of Menace is mine. The title is mine. Once they approve that, then I have to submit a sample so they can check what the style that I'm writing with, and they approve that, and then just draft the book, and then they read the draft and tell you what the things that you can and cannot include. So for one thing, for instance, that I couldn't include was Aston Martins, because Aston Martins largely feature in the films. Bond's actual car in the books was originally a Bentley, so I couldn't use Aston Martins, which I'd originally put in there, so I had to take those out.
Okay, interesting. Do they? I mean, there is the old Bond, particularly, sort of has some views that are maybe not like kind of currently,
Sure.
Up to date. Are they? You because you haven't followed that. You've got some quite strong women and various things like that in your books. Are they okay with you bringing him a bit more up to date?
Well, I mean, look, I was asked this question the other day, and people expect me to go hide behind a chair, which I'm happy to do. Of course, I love hiding behind chairs, especially when my wife is looking for me, wanting me to do some DIY. But no, I mean, the answer to that question is quite straightforward. Those books were of their time. I'm sure it's an answer that people have heard before. And I think the family and the estate have been great in moving the canon forward and realizing that Bond is this enduring character who is loved all around the world by men, by women, by people of different backgrounds, and therefore the modern versions of Bond should reflect that. And certainly for me, it was a no-brainer. I mean, simply the fact that they've asked me as a British Asian to write Q and Bond in this book, in the series, I think shows that they were looking forward to the future. And you're absolutely right. I do have strong women. So one of the women that in this book, I think I can mention this because I had a lot of fun with her. So Q, as I said, has left behind this very messy background when he left Wixton on Water, his small hometown 3 decades earlier. And part of that messy background is his childhood sweetheart, Kathy Burnham, who became his fiancée, and then he jilted her practically at the altar. And now he returns 3 decades later, and to his horror, not only is she still there, but she happens to be the detective chief inspector who was in charge of the investigation into his childhood friend Peter Napier's death. So Kathy is not best pleased to A, see Q turn up again, and B, the fact that he's trying to unravel the case that she thinks has been put to bed. So we have some wonderful scenes between Kathy and Q. I think the first time they meet, she says something along the lines of, "So the prodigal ass returns," which I think sort of encapsulates her feelings on him being there. And of course, then what happens is throughout the series, she's separated from a divorce from her husband. So we have this will they won't they get back together again vibe that goes on. And that might surprise people. They probably haven't factored in a bit of romance for Q, but remember, he's 50 years old, and he's unattached, and he's yearning for a relationship that works for him, because over these decades at MI6 he's had several relationships, but they've generally tended to end very badly because he's not very good with the whole social skills, and he's never quite lost this love for his first love, Kathy Burnham, and so it quickly rekindles. And then, of course, Kathy doesn't want to know to begin with, and then we have this dynamic going on. Do you remember Moonlighting? Do you remember watching Moonlighting when you were younger? Bruce Willis and Sybil Shepherd.
I know of it. I don't think I watched it.
Yeah, because they had that whole will they, won't they antagonism going on for ages and ages, and it's always stuck with me. And I think it's a really good foundation for a fictional sort of will they, won't they romance.
That's interesting, because you don't, for a large part of the book, you just get the sense that Kathy kind of really doesn't like him very much.
Well, would you? I mean, jilted at the altar and then ignored for 3 decades. Would you be best pleased to see this man rock up again, and not only rock up, but then basically tell you that you've been a bad bad cop and you haven't solved this case properly and he knows better than you do. I mean, absolutely, Kathy is not willing to tell him that she has any feelings for him. And so we only see that a little bit later on. But even then, I won't give anything away because that's part of the fun of reading the book to see how that plays out. But I had a lot of fun writing the pair of them, and sparks do fly, I have to say.
You got some female physicists as well, which was quite nice.
Absolutely. Why shouldn't there be? I mean, I am in awe of my colleagues at University College London, and I work in a department called the Department of Security and Crime Science, and at least half of my colleagues are brilliant female scientists and PhD candidates and researchers. And I've been there, 2 decades now. Not so much now because obviously the books have gone really well, but I the work that they do is very much, I believe, the kind of thing that Q does, in that Q is also trying to make the world a safer place, as is James Bond and the people at MI6. And from a different perspective, so are my colleagues at this department. They're trying to work out ways that we can make the world a safer place through research. And particularly the kind of things that they're looking at, might be knife crime at one end of the spectrum, and at the other end of the spectrum, it's I've just had a female colleague who has just carried out a project on how self-driving cars, autonomous vehicles, might be used by criminals once they become, quite prominent on our streets. And that's going to happen. It might take 10 years, might take 15 years, but we are all going to be in driverless cars sooner or later. So somebody has to be looking at because it's essentially a computer on wheels, right? And computers can be hacked, as we know. And if somebody were to hack into your driverless car while you're in it, what sort of mischief can they do? Well, I've had a brilliant female colleague who's been looking at exactly that. And, we work
that in the book, I think.
I absolutely do. Because I've taken things that they've done. I've basically stolen all their work and turned it into a piece of fiction and taken all the credit. No, absolutely not. I do acknowledge them in the acknowledgements. If you read the book, you'll see that I really do acknowledge. And then the plot for Quantum of Menace itself came from a discussion between colleagues where they were looking at how quantum computers might be used by criminal actors. And quantum computers, for those who don't know, are the next leap forward, or will be the next leap forward in computing technology, far, far ahead of anything that we have today. And if you thought artificial intelligence is frightening, when quantum computers won't come online for another 10 to 20 years easily, I've brought them forward a little bit. But once they do, and you pair that with artificial intelligence, it'll be truly amazing, because I believe in technology and I believe that technology can change our lives for the better, but also quite terrifying, because I also know, like Hugh does, that if you don't have guardrails in place, if you don't think carefully about people with malicious intent who might want to use this technology for bad things, then we could be in trouble too. So it's brilliant, but it's also quite scary. And part of the job that myself and my colleagues do at university, at UCL, is try to convince government and police and work with them about the dangers of this tech and how we might go about trying to mitigate against those dangers.
I mean, they do have to actually make quantum computers actually able to work.
But yeah, they do. It's a while away yet. But I mean, this is how the Bond canon has been quite brilliant, actually, because people don't realize this, but the Bond films have been quite amazing at showcasing technology. So there's a great scene that people will remember when Sean Connery in Goldfinger is strapped to a table, and Goldfinger is giving him the spiel, and then he puts a laser on between his legs to basically cut him in half, and you see Sean Connery gradually beginning to sweat as the laser approaches. And lasers had only been developed just a few years before that film was made, and it was one of the earliest on-screen depictions. And because it was so popular, it meant that whole idea of lasers and modern technology came out into the public domain in a way that hadn't been done before. And Q is always demonstrating sort of, well, to be fair, half of the things that he demonstrates don't really work very well. And, we can talk about some of the crazy things that have come out of Q branch. I mean, I don't know how you've not seen a lot of the films, but some of your listeners would remember, ridiculous things like the seagull snorkel that Sean Connery had on his head, and he comes out of the river and somehow manages to keep a straight face, even though he's got a plastic seagull on his head. And there's something called, there was the gondola in a film where the gondola in Venice comes up on land and then starts driving along, and somebody coined the phrase bondola for it, which I thought deserves a prize just on its own. But my favorite, I mean, you've got flaming bagpipes, which I thought were great. You know, you're playing away on your bagpipes, and then you can turn it around and turn it into a flamethrower. But the best one I think I remember is Q sitting in a wheelchair, and Bond is in the lab at Q branch, and Q says, "Now watch this," and then he presses a button, and a rocket fires from between his legs on this wheelchair. And I always think to myself, if that rocket had just been a few inches higher, then I probably wouldn't get to write the Q novel.
There is. I've got pinned a competition to win some copies of Quantum of Menace. And the question I came up with was, what invention would you want Q to make for you? So I've got to ask you that question.
Yeah, so for those of you who haven't seen it, there is a competition up on the UK CBC website run by my publishers where I think they might have 1 or 2 copies of Quantum of Menace to give away, but also some other goodies. I can't remember exactly what it is. But what you have to do is you have to put in a suggestion for the kind of craziest invention that you can think of Q coming up with. And I was having a look at some of these earlier. I tell you what, you've got some twisted people on UK CBC, haven't you? Can I just read?
Good answers, but what's your answer? You can't tell us what their answers are. You're going to tell us what your answer would be.
Some of these. Oh, I don't know. What do I want? I mean, if there was an invention that could make me a better cricket player, some sort of bat that, when I went out to bat, maybe it would, just as the ball was about to hit, it would extend the bat's width. So there's no way I could possibly miss it. I'd love something. I love Q to come up with something like that. Yeah, that would do me nicely.
I'd potentially want something that would make it easier to do things that are annoying when you're left-handed.
Right.
Like something that makes everything easier for left-handed people.
Well, look, cricket again. We do have left-handed gloves for cricketers. Yeah, we do. I particularly like some of the things. So when I look at some of the villains, they've always got some nifty piece of kit, haven't they? I remember Moonraker, and he's got his own shuttles, and he's got his own living space station so that he can kill off everybody on Earth and live on this space station and repopulate the Earth. Hugo Drax, and I particularly love the sidekick villain, Jaws. Do you remember Jaws with the great big tall guy with the teeth? He was like 7 foot tall. You don't remember him? Oh, he's brilliant.
I don't think I've seen that one. I have actually only ever seen 2 and a bit James Bond movies.
2 and a bit? Why a bit? What happened? You gave up very quickly?
There was a bit where I think it's Sean Connery is in Istanbul, and we used to live in Istanbul, so we watched the bits where he was in Istanbul and then gave up.
Okay.
We like, look, that's where we used to live.
Fair enough. No, I love Jaws because he was played by this brilliant actor whose name I can't quite remember right now. And this actor who's like 7 foot tall. And when you read his history, he's done some amazing things, because I think he tried to become the incredible, or rather, he was asked to be the Incredible Hulk, but he didn't like having to put on the makeup and all that other stuff. And then they decided he was too weedy. He was 7 foot tall, but he wasn't muscly enough for them, so they got rid of him and they got Lou Ferrigno instead. So amazing character. And the teeth that he wore, the special steel teeth that he wore, they actually became super valuable after his role in 2 films. And then they were displayed, because we were talking about the Science Museum earlier. They were displayed at the London Science Museum.
Yeah, cool. Yeah. We've got some questions on the stream. Donna wants to know how you have time to do a day job with everything else that you do.
Oh, because I'm a vampire, I don't sleep, right? So, well, I'm a very organized person, and I can leave my day job now. The writing has gone very well, but it's a crime and security department, which is incredibly useful, as we have just seen, for writing crime fiction. And I love my colleagues. I love the environment. it's one of those things where if you can organize your life properly, you can have the best of both worlds. Luckily, I don't have to teach. If I had to teach, because I know you're a teacher and I have sisters who are teachers and I have colleagues, of course, who are academics who have to teach, and it's the marking that is really, really tough and time consuming. If I had to do that, then yes, I would probably leave tomorrow and just write full time. But at the moment, I've got a happy balance where I can write the books and and I write early in the morning. So I do literally get up around about 6:30. I'll write for 3 hours or 4 hours, then my brain will give up, and then I would like to do something else. And what I don't want is to be given DIY tasks by my missus, so I can scuttle off and do UCL things.
Sounds very sound. Jennifer Price has said hello. Natasha wants to know about your writing routine and any thoughts that you've got on writing more on the cozy side. I mean, I don't know how cozy this is.
No, yeah, I don't particularly like the term very much. I mean, the publishing industry loves those kind of terms. So for me, we pitched it halfway between. This book is not a spy novel. It's halfway between Mick Herron's Slow Horses novels and Richard Osman's Thursday Murder Club books. So in that sense, it's sort of, you could call it a semi cozy, but it's not really, because there's no twee. There's nothing twee about it. Q is a serious man, a serious scientist dealing with a serious death, and the circumstances of that death are quite serious as well. There is a note of dry humor throughout, which it's an observational humor about the world, about the human condition, and people have really, the early readers have really enjoyed that, and I think that's what we enjoy about Mick Herron's Slow Horses. But we wouldn't call those books cozy, um, even though there's a lot of that kind of humor. It's much more about, I have nothing against the label per se, but for this particular series, the Q novels, I think it's better for you to imagine a traditional mysteries where Q is playing amateur detective, and we get a good dose of, we get a puzzle, we get a little bit of action, we get a little bit of sort of thwarted romance, and then we have that sort of dry sense of humor that comes in. And if I'm thinking about the Thursday Murder Club, Elizabeth, the character of Elizabeth, is very sort of Q-like because she has that previous intelligence agency background, and she's very dry, and she's very logical and very straightforward about what she wants to achieve. But then she's also having to navigate around people who are not like her, and that what proves quite hard for her to begin with. And then she gradually begins to understand how Joyce is a brilliant person in her own right, etc. And Q is having to do the same thing in these books, having come out of this lab where he's never really managed to make any real friendships, and now he's having to develop these relationships in this small town.
You do get the joy in this one as well, I guess, if you've watched more Bond films than me, of finding all the little references.
Yeah, there are a lot of Easter
things that you've put sort of throughout in the books.
Absolutely, because the one thing we don't want is to alienate the sort of millions of Bond fans around the world. So we want them on board, and so we have lots of Easter eggs, little references to the Bond books or the Bond films. But also James Bond makes a meaningful appearance in the second half of the book, and that was something I asked the estate, the family, would you mind if I included Bond? And I thought they would say no, because they've got other Bond continuation novels, right? But they said, yeah, absolutely, crack on. And so I had enormous fun, and I actually got quite emotional when I was writing a scene between Q and Bond that occurs, in the second half of the book. To think that me, as a British Asian who grew up watching Bond and loving Bond, and now being able to write these characters on behalf of the family and do what I want with them. And the Bond that I use in my books is very much the book Bond. So he's not the sort of, although I grew up with Roger Moore and I love Roger Moore, he's not that kind of jokey Bond. He's much more an assassin who understands that he's in the dark arts, and his life is on the line every time he goes out on a field mission. So he's got this weary cynicism about him, and that pulls through. But at the same time, we understand who he really is, and I think that's something which I really wanted to bring home in these books, and that's why I don't like the idea of them being labeled too cozy, because there's a poignancy that we sometimes uh, don't see in the films, because there's, slam bam action, and we love all that, but we know Bond's always going to win. But in real life, the field agents, the people who work for our intelligence services, they're putting their lives on the line for a way of life that we believe in. And and Britain stands for something in the world, and that's what Q and Bond have tried to defend for decades. But if the worst happens, if Q were to die, if Bond were to die, if Q's inventions failed and they led to deaths, um, we would never know about it. We would never be able to publicly say, "Well done, James Bond, for putting your life on the line and for dying in the line of fire," because of the nature of their organization. It's a secret organization, and they can't really publicly congratulate and honor these people as they deserve to be honored. So I wanted that little sense to come back into the book that I've written.
It really does. Jennifer wants to know if you've read any of the Bond books. I think you've answered that by saying that you put the Bond.
Yeah, yes, of course, yeah. And people always ask me which is my favorite. I like Moonraker, Doctor No, of course. I just love Doctor No himself as a villain. Um, and of course, Doctor No is the one where Q is introduced as Major Boothroyd. So people ask, where did Q actually come from? What's the inspiration for Q? And there's several. He appears very little in the books. He appears in Doctor No as Major Boothroyd, who's the armor of Q Branch and who convinces Bond to take on a new gun, the Walther PPK. And then, of course, in the films, he becomes Q, head of Q Branch, and then the two get schmoosed together and become the Q that we know. But the inspiration is several people. One was a chap called Jeffrey Boothroyd, who was a gun expert who wrote to Ian Fleming and said, "You've got Bond using the wrong gun." And Ian Fleming sort of corresponded with him, and then he agreed, and then he gave Bond the new gun, and then he named the armorer Major Boothroyd. There was another chap from the war, and Ian Fleming, we have to remember, was in naval intelligence during the war, and that's where he learned about all of these clandestine operations, and he worked with men like Bond, commandos who served behind enemy lines. That's where he got the ideas for all of this. And one of the people that he learnt about was a chap called Charles Fraser Smith, who was working for, I think he was working for the Ministry of Defence's clothing department, but that was just a cover. What he was really doing was producing gadgets, which he called Q gadgets, for soldiers, especially soldiers behind enemy lines, and for soldiers who might want to make escape attempts. And there was all sorts of wonderful things that he's responsible for, sort of pens that fired tear gas cartridges and mini cameras in embedded in buttons, and all sorts of lovely things like that. So these are the individuals I think that Q is based on.
There's a really when you're saying about bringing the poignancy in, there's a really great character in the book who's like a young immigrant who has sort of gone the wrong way.
Yeah,
there's a lot of kind of discussion about his path and where he could go and things, and I think he brings a lot of heart to the book.
Yeah, so he's a 17-year-old Syrian called Zachariah, or Zach, who's come to this country because of the war in Syria with his mum. His dad's been left behind, and we don't discover what's happened to his dad much later on. And he's resentful. So this kid is resentful because he wants to be back in his home country where he lived a privileged life, and now he's having to live a much reduced life. And his mum is sort of tearing her hair out because he's left school at 16, and then he's fallen in with the wrong crowd, and he's lost. He's basically lost at sea, stealing cars and doing whatnot. And then for a plot reason in the book, Q comes across him as he's investigating his childhood friend's death. And then we see this sort of, in the second half, we see a small relationship having to develop between them because Q needs him for something. But this boy is just, he's lost, and it's up to Q. There's a scene there where Q tries to explain to him that he's quite an ungrateful wretch, really, because Britain has opened its doors to him and has given him a chance, and he's not taking those opportunities. And I guess they have a kind of, and the kid tries to, kid is stuck in his sort of frame of reference, which is back home in Syria. I lived in a massive mansion, etc., etc. And so I think that sort of dynamic between the two plays out, um, and touches upon the kind of discussions we're already having in this country. So I do. This novel is also, it's a mystery at its heart. It's a murder mystery at its heart, but it's also a sort of state of the nation novel, which I've said in other places, where I'm trying to look at Britain as Britain is today, and examine some of these issues and discuss some of these issues using my characters, but to do it in a kind of a balanced perspective. So, neither shrieking on one side or the other side of this divide, but to look at these issues with a sensible prism.
He's the Q's hometown, real place or made up?
Well, so Wixton on Water is made up, but it's very much based on medieval market towns that I've sort of wandered around. And you can think of places like Ludlow and others, which have these lovely Tudor buildings and a central place in town, and maybe just 2,000 or 3,000 people live there. But things have been changing in the last decade. You've got different kinds of people coming into the town. You've got organized criminal gangs maybe trying to get into the town through something known as county lines operations. And that change has happened while Q has been down in his lab for 3 decades. So in his head, it's still the town that he grew up in. And it's quite a shock for him to come back and see that actually it's still small, but it's not as small as it once was. And also a lot of change has happened. And trying to navigate that change is quite tricky for him. And as I said, he's also left this great big mess behind, which if you read the book, you'll understand why.
And then he's kind of moved back home, adopted a dog with a we love the dog.
You're gonna have a go at me for the name. See, I did not name that dog.
It's quite adorable.
Look, Q's dog is named Bastard, right? And that's not because Q hates dogs. What's happened is that Q's come and rented a home back in Wixton on Water. His next door neighbor turns out to be a malevolent old so-and-so who's got a dog, and he's always shouting at the dog and abusing it and calling it bastard. And then he drops dead, and the dog turns up on Q's doorstep. He sees this bulldog, and Q decides to take it in, which gives us an insight into Q's character. He's not good with animals or people for that matter, but he feels obliged to take this dog in. And this dog's quite depressed, which is a real thing, which I hadn't realized, that dogs can be depressed. So Q has to work out what to do with him. And because the dog won't respond now after all these years of abuse from its owner to anything other than bastard, Q is forced to call it rather sheepishly bastard. So, yeah. I mean, at some point, I'm sure the dog will liven up, and then Q can give it a new name it might respond to. But at the moment, unfortunately, it's saddled with this name.
I know. I think it brings some of the humour in that you were talking about. It's quite funny.
I'm not sure the dog finds it funny, but
the dog might not know what that means.
Apparently, dogs can have therapy, so you can get a dog therapist if your dog's a bit depressed. Yeah, amazing. Yeah. The things you learn while researching. I learn all sorts of amazing things. So did you know that Roger Moore, for instance, suffers from something called hoplophobia, which means he has a fear of firearms, which as James Bond is quite tricky, right? So they couldn't really give him real guns to shoot off, even with fake bullets. He had to use wooden ones half the time because he really didn't like to handle any kind of weapon. And 007, do you know where 007 came from? Well, there's a couple of different theories. One about the code number on the ciphers, on the intelligence classified intelligence documents that were sent during World War II. But the better story is that it comes from a chap called John Dee, who was an alchemist and a spy for Queen Elizabeth I back in the 1500s. And when he was off spying at the European courts, he used to send letters back, classified letters back for Queen Elizabeth. And he used to put 00 on them, and the 00 stood for his eyes, which were in fact acting as Queen Elizabeth's eyes, and it's for your eyes only to the Queen. And then the number seven was a lucky number for alchemists, so he just put seven on the end of it. And Ian Fleming came across this story, and so that's one version of where he came up with 007 for Bond.
No, it's an interesting version. I like that.
I like that.
Yeah. John Dee is quite a sort of unknown, a lesser known kind of character, isn't he? But quite an interesting one.
A really, really, really interesting person from history. And you've got amazing inspirations that Ian Fleming used throughout his career. I mean, the books did well, quite reasonably well originally, but they truly became global when John F. Kennedy, the American president, said that From Russia with Love was one of his favorite books, and suddenly, boom, it was everywhere. So there you go. They even say that the last film that JFK saw before he died was From Russia with Love. Yeah.
Oh, there you go.
There you go.
You learn
Well,
new stuff every day. And there's a little sample at the back of like another book in the series. So you're writing a few more?
yeah, the aim is for it to be a series. It does largely depend on the kind of people who are tuning into this. If people buy enough copies, then we will have more than just the original. So we plan two at the moment, and the second one, the first draft is written. And if you buy the book at the moment, you will find, if you buy the hardback, you will see at the back of that hardback, you will see the opening chapter of the second book, and it is called The Man with the Golden Compass. I do love these titles. It's rare for authors to be allowed to keep their own titles, and I've written a dozen books, and I think these are the first two where I've ever been allowed to keep my own titles, and they are, of course, riffs on the original Bond titles or film titles. And in this one, Q's done such a good job in Quantum of Menace that the police have asked him to come on as a civilian contractor, which is a real thing, and he's been tasked to look at the gruesome murder of a tech millionaire. And I know we all love the idea of murdering a few tech millionaires at the moment, but in this case, this man has made his fortune in the virtual reality industry, where he creates these virtual reality environments for adults. And he's bought this big stately home in Wixton on Water on the edge of this small town. And he's been murdered, and the police find him with a small round object in his pocket, which is covered in gold and has Nordic runes on it. And so that sets Q off on an exploration that marries sort of history and technology, because history is my favorite subject. And so to marry history and technology, that becomes the plot of The Man with the Golden Compass.
That must entail some fun research then, because you can do lots for history, but do you get to try out some
Yeah, the research that, if anybody went looking through a crime writer's a Google history, we'd probably be arrested the next day because of the kind of things that we're looking up. But sometimes you get to research really wonderful esoteric things, such as Nordic runes and how they all work, and what's the meaning of a Nordic compass, and etc. etc. I mean, I because I write my other series, the Malabar House novels, they're set in 1950s India. I do a lot of historical research, and I often find myself Googling women's dresses in 1950. What would a woman wear to a cocktail soiree in the evening in 1950 out in India? So I've got all sorts of lovely things like that on there, and then it takes me forever to decide what looks realistic for a particular scene. So yeah, a lot of fun with the Man with the Golden Compass.
I like Nordic runes and all that kind of history.
Well, you know what? In my Malabar House novels and these novels, I want people to be able to read them and enjoy them as entertainment first and foremost, right? A good murder mystery with a good puzzle at its heart, some intriguing characters and a nice setting. But also, I love sprinkling in facts that hopefully you don't know, and educate you, and make you think and make you scratch your head. And at the end of the Malabar House novels, I always have a couple of pages of facts from history that are true and have ended up in the books. And people write to me from all over the world where these books are sold and say, how can that possibly be true? But they are. And ditto with this book. There's some great things that I've put in there which were news to me. I researched. I do a lot of research, and most of it, of course, never ends up in the book. But sometimes you come across some amazing things, and you think, "Oh my God, that has definitely got to go in the book," because not only is it interesting to me, but I'm sure readers will find it interesting. And just the idea of quantum computers, it's something that's so far from the public domain that nobody's even looking at it or thinking about it, and yet it will become a reality. Maybe it takes 2 decades, maybe it takes 3 decades. There's already some minor uses that quantum computers are being put to. So and this is not a technical manual; it's a murder mystery, but you will get a quick brushstrokes idea of what quantum computing is, and then you can go away and you can impress all your mates at the next sort of dinner party you're invited to, and they'll think you're an absolute bod for knowing all of this.
I did know what a quantum computer was before this.
Well, you do, Caroline, but I don't know if everybody who's tuning in. So if
No,
they want to go off, if they want to go off,
they might not all live with a physicist.
of course, there you go. So your other half, he's probably looking at my book, reading it, and thinking, "Bloody hell, he's got this wrong. He's got that wrong." Yeah. Has he got one? Has he got one in the basement? Has he got a quantum computer in his basement?
No, he's very nerdy. He's not that nerdy.
Is he an evil genius in the making? Is he going to take over the world with his quantum computer?
He's not. No, we're fine. No evil genius here.
Oh dear.
Just a very big nerd. But
that's tickled you. That's tickled you. The idea of your hubby as an You're wondering now. You're wondering how much do you really know about this man?
Enough, I think. What have you read recently and really enjoyed?
Oh, what have I read recently that I've really enjoyed? Oh, that's a good question. Well, a couple of books. I've read The Winter Job by a Finnish author called Antti Tuominen, and I love his style. It's noir. It's Finnish noir, translated in English, but there's a lot of wicked humor. And The Winter Job is about a man who's been asked to transport a sofa across country just before Christmas in Finland. But of course, there's much more to it, as he quickly discovers while he's en route. So that's a really good book. I read a book recently called The Ministry of Time, which was a kind of a contemporary romance, but with time travel elements to it. The Ministry of Time brings back some people, a handful of people from history, and then they give them to their agents. And one of their agents is a young lady who falls in love with the polar explorer that they brought back. And then it's, really about how that plays out, which I thought was a really great idea and really, really well written.
Interesting.
And you might see a copy up there of, can you see, Shogun, James Clavell's brilliant book, which I read when I was a very young person, about a British mariner who ends up in medieval samurai Japan, and what subsequently happens as he advises the shogun, the main dude in Japan of that period, and it's full of amazing Japanese feudal history. And so I wanted a new copy after all these years. My old one's totally worn away, so I bought myself a new copy, and I would reread it after many years.
So the Bond things are kind of well known for being quite globe-trotting adventures. Are you tempted to take Q somewhere exciting? And
not in the first few books, because the aim was to try and create these sort of small towny mysteries, but which are set against a broader canvas that Q is bringing with him from his past. So you'll see elements of that whole MI6, that whole espionage background, but largely speaking, they're going to be traditional murder mysteries set in and around Wixton-on-Water, this small hometown of Q's. And plus, we gradually see him finding his feet in this place. He's coming to grips with his family. He's coming to grips with his on-off relationship with Kathy Burnham, DCI Kathy Burnham. He's making gradually some friends, heaven forbid. And so we see all of that happening. And then, of course, Bond gets to make an appearance in each of the books and do something meaningful, which drags Q back to that sort of global level. So never say never. But at this moment in time, no, I want to keep him firmly grounded in Britain.
Because you will have the Midsummer Murders effect eventually, won't you, in his small town? There's only so many.
You say that, but they managed to kill about 6 million people in a town of 2,000, which is quite some doing. So if they can get away, nobody seems to get fed up with it. So there's always somebody to murder, Carolyn. That's what I've learned over the years. Always somebody to murder.
And I guess with Q, you don't have to make it murder either.
No, but I do love a good murder, I have to say. You know, somebody asked me at an event the other day. We had this amazing launch event up north near Manchester with a big prominent bookshop, and they'd laid on a Bond evening, so they had somebody singing Bond theme tunes, and everybody came dressed up in Bond characters. So it was a lovely evening. And somebody asked me, sort of, what's the kind of murders mechanisms that you like the best, the method of murder? And I love them all. It's wonderful. You can shoot people, you can drown people, you can strangle people. I mean, if I have a personal favorite, is I do like a bit of bludgeoning. There's something quite visceral and meaty about your victim being bludgeoned to death, and you can do a lot with that. As a crime writer, I should add. I'm not going to sing this. So yeah, a good bludgeoning.
You wouldn't go for an elaborate style Bond-esque sort of ridiculous setup where they're going to slowly die by being lowered into
a pit of crocodiles and whatnot.
Yeah, no. That always escape from.
Yes, exactly. I mean, I have some fun with that trope. Actually, I don't use it, but I take the mick out of it a little bit. No, that wouldn't work in a small town mystery. I mean, look, you've got lots of sort of recommendations on the back of this book from people like Anne Cleeves who've read it, and Mick Herron and the like. And I think these people are inspirations for me. So when I look at an Anne Cleeves Shetland mystery, for instance, I love the way that she manages to do this sort of small town, realistic setting with realistic characters and a realistic murder with a genuine motive behind that murder. And that motive isn't somebody wants to take over the world. It's much more local and personal. And the trick for us as crime writers is making that journey interesting for the reader by having enough red herrings and clues and alternate suspects, all with convincing motives, so that when the revelation finally comes, as it does at the end of Quantum of Menace, they go, oh, damn it, I could have worked that out, but Vaz beat me this time. Or even better, if they get close to the end and then they say, I've got it, I've put the clues together and I guessed right. Fabulous. That's just as pleasing to me. If people can, people who read a lot of crime fiction, they can enjoy the experience of reading the book, but they do work out the answer, because then they have that sort of moment of euphoria.
Is the code that you put in, so there's like a message in code. It's not really a spoiler, is it?
No, there's a cryptic code in there.
The Q, that he has to try and solve. Is that actually, we get the solution in the book, but if we actually try to
if you're good at breaking, absolutely, if you're good at breaking codes, you will work it out, but you've got to be quite good at it. And most people will just read it and say, no, I don't know what this is, and then they'll enjoy the story. They'll go on, and I'll reveal what it is a bit later. So somebody who's really great at this, and I know he's not everyone's cup of tea, but Dan Brown's books. I read the Da Vinci Code a long time ago, and I just loved the way that he used sort of codes and rhyming verse to point to things and get his protagonist to go herring off to the next place and the next thing and the next clue. And I tried to marry a murder mystery with that kind of sort of cue, working out these cryptic puzzles so that he gets to the next suspect and the next clue. I mean, this, I say this as the author, but I think there's so many different things that people can enjoy in a book like this. And if you look at I'm very humbled by the enormously good reception that it's already received. You know, the Sunday and Times named it their thriller of the month, and you know all the major newspapers have given it great reviews, and it just carries on. And would I have expected that? Absolutely, I can't. I can't say that I would have hand on heart expected that. I would have loved it when I was writing the book for that to happen. I would have dreamed about it. But when you're taking on something completely new like this, you're really relying on the, what's that lovely saying from the old play, the kindness of strangers. And so, even after I took 20, we've talked about this before, but I've took 20 odd years to get published and got 100 rejection letters. And, I've been published now for a decade, and I still haven't lost that whole joy of writing and creating characters and books. And none of it would matter. None of it would work if it wasn't for readers and for people like yourself and reviewers and bloggers and all the people who help get the word out about these books. Because if people don't know about your books, they can't make decisions about whether or not it's for them. And so, I'm enormously thankful to you and the people on this group and all the other people who help to get the word out.
And with any luck, if you get new readers drawn to this, they'll then come over and read all your other books as well.
Well, you heard it. You heard it, people. Carolyn has now ordered you to go off and read the Malabar House novels, which I still have to write more of, by the way. So they haven't stopped. So yeah, go away. India's first female police detective. Lots of lovely history in 1950s India and some properly plotted murder mysteries.
Well, it's the way to go. If you know, I do that all the time with authors. I'll find one thing that they've written, and then if I really like it, I'll go and read all their other things.
Yeah, I follow several series. So I remember when I came across Michael Connelly's Harry Bosch novels. I think it was the sixth book that somebody had recommended, an Angel's Flight, and I read it. Might have been the fifth, and I loved it so much that I instantly bought the entire canon. And now I've got like 30 of his books, and I've been lucky enough to meet him and chat to him, and he's just the nicest man. And when you meet your own literary idols, even now, as an author who's had some success, it's still super exciting to me when I meet one of my literary heroes. And the only one I never got a chance to meet, I guess, was the late great Sir Terry Pratchett, because I wouldn't be a writer today without the Discworld novels, because they were my earliest inspiration to write my first book, which was a rather crappy comic fantasy.
You can't Terry Pratchett.
I love him. Still love him. Still got some up there. You can't see them. They're over there. Guards is my favorite, if anyone is wondering.
What was the one you started this reading Discworld with? Because everyone's got a different entry point, haven't they, into the Discworld series?
Moving Pictures was the first one I came across in my local library, because we didn't have any money to actually buy books. And then I started asking the librarian and hunting every week for, are there any more of these amazing books? And you go backwards. And to be fair, I didn't quite get on with the first one or two. That I don't think he'd hit his stride. But then he had this patch of like 8 or 10 amazing books: Guards, Moving Pictures, Reaper Man, the Weird Sisters, and he was just on a roll. And I just thought he was the best thing in the world. And I used to save up my pocket money and go and buy. I got a £500 grant when I was 17 to buy textbooks for college, and instead I went to Foyles in London, and I bought a ton of Discworld books, and I got into trouble with my dad, who was not best pleased that I pissed this money away, which of course it wasn't, because it was my apprenticeship to writing my first novel, age 17. As I said, a rather rubbish comic fantasy, but at least I knew what I wanted to do with my life.
Yeah, and you did succeed. So there you go. It was worth it in the end.
It was worth it in the end. And that idea, as I said, of being able to fulfill my childhood dream, it only works because amazing people like you and the readers and reviewers and everybody else pitches in and helps get these books out there.
Right. Well, remind people what they're off to buy at the end of this.
Well, what do you want to buy, guys? What do you want to buy? You can buy anything. I mean, I'll sell you anything. Do you want to buy my amazing water flasks? That's only £1. Not really, but that's how much it'll cost you if you want it. Got my DNA on it. Look, you're going to buy Quantum of Menace, which is out in various editions. special editions from Waterstones with lovely sprayed edges and sign, and Goldsboro have a blue edition, and the indie bookshops, if you ask them, they have a lovely sprayed edge edition as well. It's on ebook, it's on audiobook, which is narrated by the excellent Alexander Armstrong. And it really feels like a bit of an event, this book, the beginning of something really special. So you might want to get in on the ground floor, and I can't really sell it any better than that.
No, that was a really good description. And then thanks for joining us.
Thank you, Caroline, and to everybody at UKCBC, and say hello to all of the rest of your amazing gang.